our next section, our next activity is called Mind the Gap. And it is a metaphor taken from this scene, which for those of you that have been to London, have traveled on the London Underground, will recognize. And the reason that I use this name for this exercise is because and I don't know the history of why we built trains and platforms that are sometimes miles apart from one another, but we have, not with some of the newer lines, but sometimes there is this incredible gap between getting off the train edge and getting onto the platform or vice versa. And what we do in London, because we have so many tourists, is that we constantly have to remind people of this. We constantly have to say over the tannoy, mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap. Right along the entire platform edge is written the words, mind the gap, because quite frankly, if you're not aware of it, you're going to slip down between that gap between the train and the platform. What happens, as somebody that's spent any reasonable amount of time in London, or as I do myself, live in London, is you eventually tune it out. You never see the sign. It's just in your subconscious. You never really hear the words. It's just part of traveling on the London Underground. But what you do by internalizing it and driving it into your subconscious is you always take a very large step as you get off the train or to get onto the train. And I want you to use that as we go through this exercise as a metaphor, because what we're doing in this exercise is taking a strategy. We're not going to do strategy specifically, but we're making it clear what the gap is between where you are today and where you want to get to in your business, and making it so clear in your business that everybody is aware of it, because that is the work that they need to do. The work that your staff need to do, the execution habits that you need to build are going to drive you forward so that you can bridge that gap. And without clarity on what that gap is, your team doesn't have the clarity of where it is they're going. And if you remind them frequently enough, mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap, then your team will put it into their subconscious so that everybody is aligned and everybody knows where they're going. So that's the metaphor for this exercise. And what we're going to create is a gap map to make that clear to your staff so that you can use that throughout the year in prioritizing what it is that is absolutely critical that you focus on next in your business. Now, does anybody remember where this term, where I used the word gap in the previous learning day? Does anybody remember where that came up and what I'm referencing back to here? So as you will obviously all remember, we did an exercise, the 7 jobs that a CEO should never delegate. And the second job that a CEO should never delegate is to identify the gap and the obstacle, is to be very clear about the gap between where you are today and where it is that you need to get to, and identify the obstacle. The obstacle is always in the gap. Identify the obstacle that you need to overcome to get to where it is that you want to go. If there was no obstacle, you would be there already. And that obstacle is not just time, otherwise you wouldn't be here. You haven't all got the perfect plan. As somebody said earlier, a lot of us are just winging it. What is the obstacle? What is the clear, specific gap between where we are today and where we want to get to? But in order to first identify that gap, we have to tick off the first job that a CEO should never delegate, and that is to create absolute crystal clarity on point A and point B. Point A is where you are today, and point B is some point in the future. You also have to be clear about what the date on point B is, and that will be different for all of you, and that's fine. Is that date simply the 31st of December this year? That's fine. Perhaps your gap and your goal and your focus is on the year. Depending on how your own time horizon works and what it is you're working on, that might be 3 years, it might be 5, it might be 10. I don't mind how long away that future point is, but do you have clarity on it? But be careful. If you do have something like a 10-year goal or a 25-year BHAG, you probably don't have a great deal of clarity on it. That's a long-term goal that you can keep in your head, but probably not the majority of your team. So what we're probably looking for here is something in the 1 to 3 year time range where you can create as much clarity at that future point as you're able to get for today, because you want to have equal clarity on both sides of the gap. So I want you to turn over the page to the next page in your workbooks, and what you have is a gap map. So you have 3 simple columns. The left-hand column is point A. We need to create clarity on point A. And on the right-hand side is point B. And what I want you to first of all do is, under point B, whatever that future point is put a date. What's clear in your strategy? What are you driving towards? Is it a year goal? Is it 31st of December? Is it a financial year? Is it some year based on your business cycle? Is it 3 years? So put a date that you believe that you can create with enough time and thinking that you can create sufficient clarity around, so we know what we're working towards. And I want you to also date point A. I want you to date today. So I want you to put down that it is the 10th of April, because this is an iterative process. In order to create clarity on this gap, unlike the one on London Underground, we have to keep going back and updating it, because where we are today will constantly be shifting, and quite possibly our view on what that looks like and where our goals are in the future may also shift as well. So this has to be an iterative process. So start out, you've got the date today, 10th of April, and you've got a date in the future. That's for you to choose. Now, there is unlimited levels of clarity that you can bring to the picture of where you are today and where you are in the future. But what I'm going to get you to do right now is cover off 8 different areas where you can create some clarity. First is revenue. You all know, hopefully, what your revenue is today. How you express that is up to you. But I don't want to hear what your last year's revenue were, because hopefully you're all growing businesses. So perhaps what is the current run rate or your annualized revenue based on your performance perhaps over the last 3 months. So a revenue picture that gives you an idea of what the revenue generating capability of your business is today. And obviously you then want to add to that your profitability. You may choose to present that as a percentage. You may choose to present that as an absolute number in your currency. That's up to you. So we want revenue, we want profitability. I think it's very important also that we have an expression of how many people are currently driving this business. What is the head count? Now that could be full-time employees, it could be part-time employees, it could be contractors. However your staff, however the people are driving the value in your business, the value creation for the customer and value back to the shareholders, how many people is that taking? So what is the head count? They don't have to be full-time employees. Many of you will use contractors as well. I want you to create some clarity around who your customer is. Now that could be which industries you serve. It could be who are your best customers. It could be specifically whether you're dealing with large companies, small companies. Are the majority of your customers small customers, but your ideal customer are the few large customers you have? What do they look like? What is the buyer profile? Who are the decision makers? Who do you sell to? Who finally is the end user of your product or service? And that's the next point, is to come to your product or service. What are the details of your product or service? It might seem obvious, but if you think about it, for those of you that have been in business for a number of years, especially if you're sort of 5 years or more, the product or service you're providing might be radically different between those 2 points in time. So what is the product or service that you are selling? Sometimes it's even a different perspective to think about what the customer is actually buying. What you're selling might be a product or service, but what the customer might be buying is a reduction in risk. They might be buying that it feels good to use your product or service, or enables them to connect with other people, or it enables them to make more profit and be more productive in their business. What are you selling? What is the customer buying? Very much relevant to the content today, what is the maturity of the operations engine of your business? What is the maturity of your management systems? How mature are your other business systems and your processes? Again, more clarity around this allows you to be more clear about the work that needs to be done to get to that point in the future. What KPIs do you have that are driving your business? You may have an entire dashboard and you may have hundreds of KPIs, but what are the top 2 or 3 numbers that you measure and monitor that drive your business? What are the most important KPIs after revenue and profitability? And then the last point that I want you to think about is, what are the current constraints in your business? Where are there weaknesses? Where are there issues? Where are there things holding you back? This could be one of the most important areas, and one area where you have to be really honest with yourself about what your business looks like today and what is holding you back. So what I'd like you to do is fill in all of this information for point A and all of this information for point B in the future. What does your business look like if you've picked the 31st of December? What is the headcount in the business at the 31st of December? What key changes will there be? Obviously, you'll be very focused on what the revenue would be. What would the maturity of your ops systems need to be in order to have that business with that revenue? Will your product or service change? Will you be selling to larger customers? Will it be more customers? Will it be number of units sold, number of customers served? What does that look like? Will you be going from serving 100 customers a year to serving 200 customers a year? Bring clarity to all of these points so that you can distinctly see the business as it is today, open, honest, fair, and true to the reality in your business today, with all of the constraints, all of the duct tape and string that's holding together as it is today, and what that looks like a year out or whatever your time horizon is. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it absolutely has to be different. Different outcomes will require different actions, different behaviors, different systems, maybe different people, different products, different customers. So we want to be as clear about those differences as possible. But look, put it this way, right? Do you guys own a company or do you own a job? Because if you own a job, then you have to work every day in that job. It's a strange job because no one's going to fire you, other than your customer. But if you own a company, then you're an investor. And if you're an investor, then you don't have to work that job. If you were buying shares because you believed the company was on the up, then you would sit back and hopefully watch those shares increase. Eventually, as entrepreneurs, I assume that we all want to be an investor and not work 40 hours or 60 hours or whatever it is that you're doing. And you get to make that decision. It's probably why you decided to become an entrepreneur in the first place, because you decided that I wanted to do things differently. I wanted to live life on my own terms. I want to do this. I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to travel. Whatever it is that you said to yourself, whatever freedoms you promised yourself, are you keeping that promise? And if you're not, that reflects exactly on what you're doing right now, because that point in the future, and maybe that's something that you should write down. How many hours are you spending in the business today? How many hours do you want to be spending in the business in the future? And that could be days per week, it could be hours, it could simply be the freedom to go on holiday and for the phone not to ring. Because if that's what you want, and I urge for all of you that it should be a part of what you want, then put that down, because the only way you're going to get there is if you're clear about it, if you can see the gap between whatever hours you're doing today and the freedom that you want in the future. And I'm sure that I don't want to go and play golf. I don't want to lay on a deck chair in the sun. And that's probably not what most of you want to do too. We're doers. Entrepreneurs are doers. So this isn't about doing nothing, but it is about having freedom of time, freedom of place, and eventually freedom of money. But we often think just about the freedom of money, but the issue with freedom of money is if you haven't got the time to do what you want to do, then the money is worthless. And when people sell their companies, and I've had countless experience shares of this from colleagues and peers, when they sell their company, half of those people have a mental breakdown because they don't know what they're going to do. They've got freedom of money, but they never plan for the freedom of time and the freedom of place. Figure that out first. I have a very good friend who was at a junction in the road where he was able to decide, should he buy a bigger boat? What a great position to be. First world problem. But thankfully, he realized that he didn't need a bigger boat because he did not have the time to be on the boat. Does he want to pull up into the harbor in the sexiest boat? Or does he simply want the smaller boat and have the time to be on the boat? It's the time on the boat that is more important than the boat. Time is very valuable. So put how much time you need to spend in the business in your column B. Super valuable. We've done our first job of a CEO. We've clearly identified point A and point B. This, by the way, is iterative. Go away and spend more time on this. Keep this piece of paper. This could be the most important piece of paper to keep with you. Travel with it. But also go into it with your team. Get more clarity on where you are today. What do the finances look like? What are the issues? Get input on that. And on point B, maybe you go back and you speak to your partner about that. What do we really want to be in the future? Do we want to be here? Do we want to be there? How much time do we want to spend with our kids, with our family, doing the activities we love? What does that look like in the future? Because if in the future your business is earning more money, but you're still doing 40 or 60-hour weeks, it's probably not what you were aiming for. So why not be clear on that today? And operational maturity, and what we're focusing on today in Execution Day, is a huge part of what will enable that. Two things enable that: the operational maturity, the execution habits, and the business being able to generate enough profit that it can pay to replace you, because there will likely still need to be a senior leader, a general manager, maybe a future CEO that does what you do today. But a lot of what you're probably doing today is just working in the business and working directly for the customer, which is a limiting factor. At some point, you have to replace yourself. Systems and processes are what will eventually replace you. So, We've now got this chasm between our 2 points on our page, between today and between the future. Now what we need to do is identify, looking at that gap, identify what the obstacle is. The obstacle is in the gap. The gap is just the empty column, but the obstacle is what is standing in your way, getting you from point A to point B. And the first thing we have to do is get clear about what that obstacle is. You may prefer the word obstacle, you may prefer the word problem. The critical thing is that we have to get crystal clear on what that issue is, obstacle, issue, problem. I'm not fussed about the word. We have to be crystal clear on what that is before we can solve it. As entrepreneurs, we have a habit of leaping to solutions. We have a habit of letting our minds race to I know what to do. But we need to honor and we need to spend time on being very clear about what the problem is, because we will sometimes be wrong. All too often, we will be wrong. And if you rush into a solution and solve the wrong problem, that is obviously not only a waste of time, it is a waste of resources, and it is a failure that you will have to admit and accept. But also, if we're not clear about the problem, and so an issue that I see so many companies encounter, particularly when they set quarterly priorities, is because they don't get clear first about the problem. They decide to set about doing some work for the quarter. And at the end of the quarter, they've completed the project, they've done the work, but then a quarter or two later, it comes back. The problem wasn't solved, the issue's still there. Didn't we put in a system to say, hang on, what happened here? And because they didn't clearly identify the problem, they had no mirror to hold up against the solution to say, did we get this done? You have to be clear about what problems you're solving. So we have to get clear about the problem first. I'll give you an elegant example of this. Is anybody old enough to have remembered when Napster launched in 1999? Yes? Yes? Enough of us. I'll tip off about my age. I was a 19-year-old, so I was pretty keen to download free music. So I was absolutely there. This is the heyday of the internet. For those of you that don't know the story, Napster launched as an online free file sharing platform, primarily for MP3s. People were now sharing music and they weren't paying for it, and the music industry was angry. And the music industry framed this problem as piracy, because piracy had always been around. You could copy a cassette tape. In 1999, you could copy a CD. Remember those? So they framed the problem as one of piracy, and they went after this problem aggressively. They went to the US courts and they got this through the courts quicker than anything in history, and the US courts managed to force Napster to shut down. This did absolutely nothing for the problem, because the problem was not piracy, the problem was a customer shift to digital. The problem was an absolute sea change in how people behave, in how the customer behaves, in how people share information, and how people want to access information. Cheap MP3 players were flooding the market. People wanted to listen to music on the move. They wanted to be able to exchange their data digitally. They didn't frame the problem. And who solved the problem? iTunes solved the problem. And iTunes invented what's called digital rights management, which for those of you who don't know is a simple bit of technology that says I own this song and I can put it on my iPod and I can't share it with you. But you can download it quickly, easily, conveniently, and you only have to buy a single, you don't have to buy the whole album, and iTunes changed the world forever. Had the music industry had recognized the problem, the music industry could have owned that solution. But actually the music industry lost out big time, and Apple got the upside. So we have to be crystal clear on what the problem is and what we see as the problem, what we see as the symptom, what we see as the trouble that is going on right now may not always be the problem. So our first step is that we have to be clear about what the obstacles are getting it from A to point B. And really deeply question, is that really the obstacle? We have to get super honest with ourselves about what the obstacle is, and we have to keep questioning it, which is why it's here in your gap map. Then what we want to do is we want to think about what the solutions to that problem is. Solutions in plural. We want to map out multiple solutions, because one solution may not cut it. The first solution may not cut it. And again, we want to ideate at this point. We don't just want to say that it's one thing. We can then later pick and prioritize one thing. We'll come to prioritization. But at this point, we want to map out our options. So we're thinking about solutions in the plural. Solutions are hypotheses. They are not facts. They have not been tested. They have not been verified. Even if somebody else has pursued that solution for that problem, it might have been a different solution and a slightly different problem in a different time, in a different market, for a different company, in a different product and a different service. Be wary of other people's solutions. So we want to be open, especially about the problem, and we also want to be open about the solution. They're hypotheses to be tested. And because they're hypotheses to be tested, we are basing the solutions on assumptions. And so what we also want to do is record what those assumptions are. Well, I'm assuming that because somebody else did this, or because AdWords worked for this person, or because there are so many assumptions tied up when we go and do a solution. Usually because we've made a mental shortcut to think that something works because we believe it, and the belief may be false. Times might have changed, or because we've seen someone else do it, which is no guarantee it works for us. So we want to record what those assumptions are. The quality of our choices, the quality of what we do is based hugely on our assumptions. And so we also want to look at how we can improve the quality of our assumptions. Our assumption might be that in order to grow, we can have customers that spend double what they are now. So we have customers maybe spending $1,000, average order value. We believe that we can grow by getting to $2,000 average order value. Okay, that's an absolutely fantastic goal. And that's your growth plan. But what is the assumption? The assumption is that there's now going to be a different customer that is going to pay more. And so we want to also understand how can we improve the quality of that assumption. In that case, we obviously need to get that first customer. We need to understand that there are enough customers out there. We need to believe that they're still getting value at $2,000. We need to show that we're giving value at $2,000 and that we can grow to a level where we have sufficient customers at that level. So we have to constantly go back and refine the quality of our assumptions. And if any of that falls down, in our testing, if we find that our assumptions are wrong, we have to go back. But by having all of this information back in there, we can go back to other solutions and we can go back and always re-clarify, re-qualify if we were actually looking at the right problem. Or were we just going after piracy when the issue was a sea change to digital, which might have been hard to see in 1999. It was probably very hard to see in 1999. Had they constantly checked, hey, somebody else solved it. So what I want you to do, use those headings in your middle column and start to think about what the top 1 or 2 major obstacles are in your way that are holding you back from getting from point A to point B, what some possible solutions are to those problems, with the openness that they are hypotheses, not facts, what assumptions they are based on, and how you can improve the quality of those assumptions.